Good afternoon, and welcome to I'll Tell You What's the Truth. The day is Wednesday, August the 26th. And as I visit with you today, it's rumbling outside and making some loud noises, and it, of course, calls to mind the fact that Hurricane Laura is headed towards the Gulf Coast. So let's say a special prayer for all the folks that are currently in the way of those storms that are happening down our Gulf Coast. Today, as we think about prayer a little bit, I want to share with you a story. It's an old story. It goes back a good while, and it was in Reader's Digest. It was written by a guy named Paul Villard, and it sort of made him famous. It goes back to a time when telephones were very different than they are now. It's a story about a little girl named Mary and a telephone operator named Sally. And back in those days, the telephone was sort of like a box that sat on the wall. We had one of these when I was a young boy. I remember it. And it had a receiver you held in your hand up to your ear, and I guess you'd call it a microphone that you spoke into. And when you made a call, of course, you picked up the receiver and you rang the operator. And you told the operator who you wanted to call, a number, a ring, or whatever. And the operator would attend to that. And, of course, sometimes when your phone would ring, you'd pick it up. And the interesting thing is, back then, we mostly had party lines. We had one of those. And when you answered the phone, you felt like you might want to say, well, how's everybody today? Because there was always somebody else listening in. Well, anyway, the story is about a young girl named Mary. And Mary had noticed that her mother would call something called information, please, and get information. For example, if the clock stopped, back in those days that happened because, of course, might have forgotten to wind it. And her mother would call and ask information, please, and ask what the time was, and information, please would tell her. Or she would look for somebody's phone number, the same thing. She got all kinds of information from information, please. One day, Mary, who was a bit of a tomboy, was playing on her dad's workbench. And she managed to bang her finger up pretty good. Enough that it hurt a lot and made her cry. And so she did what children would do. She ran to her mother. Except that her mother wasn't in the house. And she didn't know where she was, and she didn't know what to do. So, she rang the phone and asked for information, please. And Sally, the operator, answered. And she told her what her problem was, and she didn't know where her mother was, and she'd hurt her finger. And so Sally asked her, well, is it bleeding? And she said, no. But is it hurt? Yes. Well, she said, go to the ice box and get a piece of ice and just put that on your finger and hold it for a while, and it'll be okay. Well, it worked. It helped. And so Mary got to calling information, please, to talk to Sally from time to time. They developed a friendship. And then one day, Mary's pet canary died. And so she called Sally an information, please, and she told her all about her pet canary. And Sally told her not to get too sad about her pet canary. Yes, she would miss her, and it was certainly a favorite of hers. But to remember, when she thinks of her pet canary, to remember that there are always other worlds in which to sing. Well, of course, eventually Mary's family moved away from the West Coast, moved all the way to the other side of the country, to Boston, and the new house didn't have a party line and information, please. And so Mary didn't have Sally to call up and talk to. And then, of course, several years later, Mary was an adult, and she found herself back out on the West Coast. So she was in the airport. She had some time to wait in between planes, and so she thought, well, why not? And so she went to the phone, and she called the telephone company, and she asked for Sally, who had been the information please operator a long, long time ago, and she didn't know if the lady would know Sally or not, but if she did, or someone like Sally, if she had someone named Sally, could she speak to her? Well, it so happens that the lady she got on the phone knew Sally, and Sally had a different job now at the phone company, but she connected them together, and so Sally wasn't too far away, and so she came over, and she and Mary had a good visit. And that was a wonderful time. And Mary was so happy flying back home to have been reunited with her friend Sally. Well, About 6 months later, Mary found herself back out on the West Coast. And she called the phone company again. And when she did, she found out that Sally wasn't there. And the woman on the other end said, "Is your name Mary?" And she said, "Well, yes, it is." She said, "Well, Sally left a message for you. Here it is." You see, Sally hadn't been well in recent months, and 5 weeks ago, she died. And she left this message for you. She wanted me to tell you that when you call, that Sally still believes there are other worlds to sing in. And Mary knew exactly what she meant, and she smiled as she hung up the phone. So let me bore your ears for just another minute to say this, because we certainly live in a time when we have plenty of things that weigh heavy on our hearts. And in all of those times, in the times of celebration, in times of uncertainty, this story reminds us, as Sally reminded Mary, that there is always an ear that's listening, an ear that's eager to hear the deep things of our heart, an ear that wants to help. It's the ear of the one who is preparing in another place, in another world, for you, a place for you and me to sing. And that might cause us to pray something like this. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me along right pathways for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Remember, do the best you can. Lean on God. Encourage one another. Wear your masks. A better day is coming. Shalom.